The restaurant was warm and quiet that afternoon, filled with the gentle clinking of cutlery and soft conversation. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a peaceful golden glow across the polished tables. It was the kind of place where people came to feel special, a place that prided itself on luxury and fine service. But at one small table by the window, a woman sat alone, her presence almost invisible to those around her. She looked ordinary, maybe too ordinary for such a place. Her hair was silver, neatly combed, and her clothes were simple, showing signs of wear. Her old leather handbag sat gently beside her chair, its corners faded and scuffed. She held a small cane across her lap, her hands resting on it with a quiet patience. Anyone who really looked at her might have noticed the wisdom in her eyes, the kindness in her face, but few bothered to look. Certainly not Jake, the young waiter on duty that day. Jake was tired and impatient, his mind more on when his shift would end than on the customers. When he noticed the elderly woman sitting alone, he sighed heavily. In his eyes, she didn't fit the image of a good customer. Her plain appearance suggested she wouldn't tip well, if at all. He thought to himself, just great. A waste of time. These thoughts made his footsteps heavy and his attitude sharp as he approached her table. "What do you want?" he asked coldly, his tone lacking warmth or care. No smile, no welcome. The woman looked up and met his gaze with a gentle smile. Her voice was soft, almost musical. "I would like a cup of tea, please, and a small slice of cake, if that's all right." Jake's face twisted into a smirk. "Just tea and cake? You do know this is an expensive restaurant, right? We don't serve cheap snacks here." His voice carried across the room, loud enough that a few nearby diners turned their heads. Some frowned, sensing something was wrong, but no one spoke. The woman's smile didn't fade. She didn't seem embarrassed or upset. Instead, she nodded kindly and replied, "That is all I wish for today. Thank you." Jake rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath as he walked away, making sure she could hear the frustration in his voice. Behind the scenes, another server, Maria, watched him closely. Maria was older and wiser. She had worked there for years and could read people better than Jake ever could. She felt a strange pull as she looked at the woman by the window. Something about her seemed familiar. But Maria couldn't quite place it. As the woman waited for her tea and cake, she sat quietly, her gaze drifting to the window. Outside, life rushed on, cars passing, people hurrying down the street, lost in their own worlds. Inside, time seemed too slow for her. She looked peaceful, even graceful in her stillness, as if she carried a deep understanding of life's ups and downs. When Jake finally brought her order, he dropped the cup and plate on the table without care. "Enjoy," he said, his words dripping with sarcasm. Still, the woman nodded politely and thanked him, her voice calm and kind. This puzzled Jake in a strange way. Why didn't she react? Why wasn't she offended? His irritation grew even though she had done nothing wrong. Then something unexpected happened. As the woman lifted her teacup, the restaurant's front door opened again, and two men in dark suits walked in with purpose. Their suits were sharp and their shoes polished. They moved with confidence but carried a quiet respect. They looked around the room, then made their way directly to the woman's table. "There you are, ma'am," one of them said warmly as he gently pulled out a chair for her. "We've been looking for you. Your son asked us to make sure you have everything you need today." The entire room seemed to freeze for a moment. Jake felt a chill run through him. His heart began to pound as confusion washed over him. "Your son?" he whispered under his breath. Who could this woman possibly be that she had men like that looking after her? Maria, standing nearby, felt her memory finally click into place. She leaned toward Jake, her voice shaking slightly as she whispered, "Don't you know who that is? That's Keanu Reeves' mother." The name hit Jake like thunder. Keanu Reeves, the actor beloved by millions, known for his kindness, humility, and generosity. Jake had seen his movies, admired his talent, even heard stories of his respect for ordinary people. And this woman was the person who raised him. Jake's face turned pale. Guilt gripped him so hard he felt like he couldn't breathe. He replayed every moment of his rudeness in his mind. The cold greeting, the careless service, the loud insults. He had judged her by her appearance, by her quietness, by the worn leather of her handbag, never imagining she was someone whose son had touched the hearts of people all over the world. The other diners began to whisper now too. Eyes turned toward Jake, and though no one said anything directly, their glances spoke volumes. Shame filled him completely, but the woman herself showed no sign of anger or hurt. She lifted her cup carefully, took a small sip, and then looked up at Jake, catching his terrified eyes. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then, in the kindest, most gentle voice, she said, "Thank you for your service today." Those simple words crushed him more than any scolding could have. She was showing him kindness, even after he had shown her none. It was a lesson he would never forget. True respect is not about status, clothing, or how important someone looks. It is something every human being deserves, no matter what. And in that moment, Jake knew that this day would change him forever. The restaurant's atmosphere had shifted completely. A quiet tension filled the air as whispers spread from table to table. Customers who had watched the scene unfold were now stealing glances at the elderly woman, wondering how they had missed her grace, her quiet dignity, and most of all, the fact that she was the mother of someone as famous as Keanu Reeves. Jake could hardly stand still. He felt exposed and ashamed as the realization settled deeper into his heart. Every rude word he had uttered now echoed louder in his mind. He felt small, his earlier arrogance replaced by annoying regret that tightened in his chest. He avoided her gaze at first, but somehow, the softness in her eyes kept pulling him back. The two suited men sat at her table now, speaking to her with warmth and respect. They asked softly if she needed anything more, if she was comfortable, if there was anything they could bring her to make her day better. She answered them with kindness and humility, as if none of the earlier disrespect had happened. But Maria, the older waitress, was watching Jake closely. She could see the conflict written all over his face, the guilt, the confusion, the shame. After years of working in that restaurant, Maria had learned to read people's hearts in their silences. Quietly, she walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes," she whispered gently, "you get a chance to fix a mistake before it becomes a wound you can't heal." Those simple words struck Jake deeper than she could know. He looked back at the woman, still sitting calmly at the table, sipping her tea as if the whole world wasn't now staring at her. He wondered how she could remain so peaceful, how she could respond to unkindness with such grace. After a moment's hesitation, he walked toward her table again, his steps slow and unsure. He felt like a child approaching a teacher after doing something terribly wrong. As he reached her, he stopped for a moment, struggling to find the right words. The woman looked up, her eyes meeting his again. Her expression was calm and patient, as if she knew he would come. "Ma'am," he began, his voice quiet but trembling, "I want to say I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I judged you wrongly and spoke without respect. I had no idea." He couldn't even finish the sentence. He felt embarrassed to mention her son's name now, as if doing so would only make his apology feel shallow. But the woman's response surprised him again. She reached out and gently touched his hand. Her fingers were soft and cool, but the warmth of her gesture was undeniable. "Young man," she said softly, "thank you for saying that. But you don't need to speak of my son. This moment is about you and me, nothing more." Her words stunned Jake. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness in her expression. She was simply present, fully engaged in this moment of human connection. It wasn't about fame or status to her. It was about kindness, dignity, respect. He felt his throat tighten as emotion rose within him. "You're very kind," he whispered, almost too softly for her to hear. "More kind than I deserve." She smiled gently, her eyes glimmering with understanding. "We all make mistakes, young man. What matters is how we learn from them. Remember that every person who walks through this door deserves respect, not because of what they wear or who they. No, but because they're human." Those words cut through all the noise in his mind. They sank into his heart with a quiet power that no lecture or punishment could ever match. For the first time that day, Jake felt like he truly understood the meaning of humility. Nearby diners were still watching, but their faces had softened now. Many of them seemed touched by what they were witnessing. Some even smiled gently, nodding to themselves as if reminded of lessons they too had forgotten. As Jake walked back toward the counter, his steps felt different. Lighter, almost freer. The weight of his earlier anger and frustration had begun to lift, replaced by a quiet resolve to be better. Maria met him halfway. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes told him everything. She was proud of him, not because he had apologized to a famous person's mother, but because he had finally seen what true respect looked like. At the woman's table, the two suited men continued their quiet conversation with her, but she paused for a moment and glanced out the window again. Her eyes looked distant, thoughtful, as if she was remembering something long ago, maybe memories of raising her son, maybe memories of lessons she had learned herself about kindness, struggle, and grace. For the rest of her time there, the restaurant felt different. It was quieter, but not with awkwardness, with respect. The woman's presence seemed to calm everyone around her, as if she carried a quiet dignity that changed the room itself. Before she left, she folded a small note and left it on the table. It wasn't a tip in money, but a note addressed to Jake. Maria saw her place it there, but didn't touch it right away. When the woman finally stood to leave, the two men escorting her helped her gently, treating her with care that came from genuine respect, not duty. Jake waited until she had left before walking slowly back to her table. His heart pounded as he reached for the note she had left. He unfolded it carefully, and there, written in neat, graceful handwriting, were just a few simple words. "Thank you for learning today. I hope you carry this lesson forward, not just for me but for everyone." His hands trembled as he held the note. He knew then that he would never forget this day. Her lesson would stay with him for the rest of his life. As the door closed gently behind the elderly woman and her quiet escort, a strange silence remained in the restaurant. Even the clinking of glasses and the usual soft hum of conversation seemed to pause, as if the entire space itself was reflecting on what had just happened. Jake stood still at the corner of the dining area, holding the folded note in his trembling hands. The neat handwriting, so calm and kind, felt heavier than any weight he had ever carried. He read her words again silently, almost as if afraid he might forget them. "Thank you for learning today. I hope you carry this lesson forward. Not just for me, but for everyone." Her message wasn't just about this one moment. It was about how he would live every day after this. Maria approached him slowly, a gentle expression on her face. She didn't rush him or scold him, nor did she offer any comforting platitudes. Instead, she simply stood beside him in quiet solidarity. Sometimes speaks louder than any words, and Jake felt strangely grateful for that silence now. The restaurant began to return to its usual rhythm, but something had changed beneath the surface. Customers were more polite to each other. Staff spoke in softer tones, and even the kitchen seemed to move with a more thoughtful energy. It was as if that woman's presence had left behind a lingering lesson for everyone, not just for Jake. Later that evening, long after the rush had ended and most tables sat empty, Jake sat at one of them with his apron folded neatly beside him. Maria brought him a cup of tea without asking, setting it down gently before him. "You did the right thing today," she said quietly, her voice filled with warmth. "But this is just the start, you know." Jake nodded slowly. "I know," he replied, his voice soft and full of reflection. "It's strange how one moment can wake you up. I thought I understood people. I thought I was smart enough to judge who deserved kindness. But today... Today I learned I've been wrong. All along." Maria smiled gently. "We've all been wrong before. What matters is that you saw it and learned from it." Jake's thoughts drifted as he sipped his tea. He wondered about the woman's life. Who was she really beyond being Keanu Reeves' mother? What kind of experiences had shaped her into someone who could respond to rudeness with grace, to judgment with kindness? What pain had she endured that taught her not to return anger for anger? And then a memory surfaced, something from his own childhood. He remembered his mother's hands, rough from long hours cleaning houses, and her tired eyes that still sparkled when she smiled at him. He remembered how she had taught him to always treat others kindly, no matter what they looked like, no matter what they had. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that lesson. Life, stress, and bitterness had hardened him, closing his heart. Little by little, until he couldn't even see people properly anymore. The realization made his chest ache. Tears filled his eyes but didn't fall, sitting quietly in the corners as he breathed deeply, letting the truth of the day settle into him. As he sat there lost in thought, Maria spoke again, this time more softly than before. "You know, she didn't have to say anything kind to you. She could have asked to speak to the manager. She could have embarrassed you in front of everyone. But she chose kindness." Jake looked up at Maria, understanding now what he hadn't before. "That's real strength, isn't it? To be treated badly and still choose kindness." Maria nodded. "Yes. It's the kind of strength many people forget exists." The words hung in the air, and Jake felt them deeply. As the night grew darker and the last customers left, Jake stayed behind, helping Maria wipe down tables and sweep the floor. He worked differently now, slower, more thoughtful, paying attention to each table, each chair, even the smallest details. It was as if he finally understood that these simple acts of service carried meaning. Before leaving for the night, he tucked the note carefully into his wallet, placing it where he would see it every day. It would be a quiet reminder to stay humble, stay kind, and never judge anyone too quickly again. When he stepped out into the cool night air, the city felt different. The same streets he had walked countless times now felt like they held new stories, stories he had never bothered to see before. He looked up at the sky, where stars twinkled faintly behind city lights, and felt a strange peace inside himself. Promised quietly, "Tomorrow, I will be better." And though he knew he could not change the past, he understood now that every new day was a chance to do things differently. The next morning, as the city awoke to its usual rhythm of rushing footsteps and honking cars, Jake arrived at the restaurant early. The sun had barely risen, and the air outside still carried the coolness of night. But inside him, something had shifted deeply. He walked into the dining room with a calm he hadn't felt in years, pausing for a moment to look around at the tables, chairs, and windows he had walked past every day without really noticing. He felt different, more awake, more alive. His mind kept returning to the woman's face, not because she was famous or connected to a celebrity, but because of how she had responded to him. Her kindness had caught him off guard, and her gentle words had stayed in his heart overnight like a quiet echo. As he moved through his morning tasks, wiping down tables and aligning silverware, he thought carefully about every guest who would walk through the doors that day. Each one, he realized, would bring their own story, their own pain or joy, their own reasons for sitting at a table. And it wasn't his job to judge them, but simply to serve them with dignity. When Maria arrived a little later, she noticed the change in him immediately. "You're here early," she said with a knowing smile. Jake nodded. I wanted to start fresh today, he replied softly. Really start fresh. Maria said nothing more, but her smile said she understood perfectly. As the first customers began to arrive, Jake greeted them with genuine warmth. His words were the same as before. Good morning. How may I help you today? But something about the way he said them felt different now. He looked people in the eyes, listened carefully, and treated every request with care, no matter how small. He no longer rushed or rolled his eyes when a customer asked a simple question. He didn't sigh impatiently when an elderly couple took longer to decide what they wanted. Instead, he felt honored to serve them, knowing that kindness was a gift. He could give freely. But as the day passed, another test was coming, one that would show whether Jake's change was real. Just after lunchtime, the restaurant's front door opened, and a man walked in alone. He was disheveled, wearing clothes that were old and stained. His hair was messy, and his face looked tired, worn down by life. Some customers immediately turned away, pretending not to notice him. A few even exchanged uncomfortable glances, whispering quietly. Jake felt his old instincts rise, the quick judgment, the annoyance, the temptation to ignore this man completely. But then he caught himself. He remembered the elderly woman's smile, her gentle voice, her grace despite being treated unfairly. So instead of turning away, Jake approached the man slowly. Good afternoon, sir, he said kindly. Can I help you with a table today? The man looked surprised. He seemed unsure whether he even belonged in such a place, but Jake's tone was so warm and welcoming that he nodded shyly. Just a cup of coffee, if that's okay, the man murmured. Of course, Jake replied without hesitation. He led him to a quiet corner table, pulled out a chair for him, and brought over a menu. Take your time, Jake added gently. As he walked back toward the counter, Maria watched him closely. There was pride in her eyes, not because he was simply doing his job, but because he had learned something that many people never did. Every human being deserves dignity. The other customers slowly relaxed, their curiosity fading as they returned to their meals. And soon the restaurant felt peaceful again. Later, Jake brought the man his coffee. Can I get you anything else today? He asked politely. The man shook his head. This is more than enough. Thank you. Thank you for treating me kindly, he said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. Jake felt something inside him soften further. He realized this was exactly what the elderly woman had meant in her note. Kindness wasn't just something you gave to people who looked important or wealthy. It was something you gave to everyone, freely, without judgment. The man stayed for a while, sipping his coffee slowly, as if savoring not just the warmth of the drink, but the rare warmth of being treated like he mattered. When he left, he stopped at the door and turned back toward Jake. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and though no more words were spoken, an unspoken understanding passed between them, one human being acknowledging another. As the afternoon light faded into early evening, Jake felt peaceful and content. He wasn't perfect. He still had much to learn. But he had taken a first, important step toward becoming a better version of himself. He knew the road ahead would not always be easy, but he was ready. Because now he understood that even small moments, a smile, a gentle word, a simple kindness, could change not only someone else's day, but also his own heart. And as he wiped down the tables once more, he paused at the corner table by the window where the elderly woman had sat just the day before. He smiled to himself and whispered quietly, "Thank you." The following days brought new challenges for Jake. Though he felt a new sense of purpose each morning, not everyone around him understood his change. Some staff members still joked behind his back, saying he was just trying to make up for what happened that day. A few even teased him openly, calling him teacher's pet or Mr. Polite. Their words stung, but Jake didn't respond. He had learned that real change required patience, and he was determined to stay true to what he had learned. No matter what anyone else thought, even Maria, who had encouraged him, watched carefully. She wanted to see whether this change in Jake was temporary or something deeper, something lasting. And though she said little, her quiet support gave Jake strength. Each day, as new customers arrived, Jake made a point to treat every person with genuine kindness. Whether it was a wealthy businessman in expensive suit or a tired mother juggling children and grocery bags, he served them all with the same respect. Slowly, something began to shift, not just inside Jake but inside the restaurant itself. Atmosphere grew warmer. Regular customers noticed the difference. They stayed longer, spoke more kindly, even tipped better. Some of them began to smile at Jake, grateful for his warmth and attentiveness. Little by little, his colleagues stopped teasing him and started copying him. One by one, they softened too, as if kindness was contagious, but it was on the 5th day after the encounter with the elderly woman that Jake faced another test, one that would strike closer to his heart. Early that afternoon, just as the restaurant was filling up with the busy lunch crowd, a woman walked in who looked familiar. She was older, with tired eyes and clothes that spoke of a life of hard work. Her hands looked rough, her shoes worn. She hesitated at the entrance, looking uncertain, almost embarrassed to be there. Jake froze for a second. His breath caught as he realized who she was. It was his own mother. He hadn't seen her in weeks. Life had been busy, and their relationship had grown distant lately. He remembered how, in his rush to prove himself at work, he had stopped answering her calls, brushing off her invitations for dinner. She had always worked hard to raise him alone, sacrificing so much so he could have a better life, and yet here she was now, hesitant, uncertain, as if unsure whether she even belonged in the restaurant where her own son worked. The sight of her humbled him completely. In that moment, he felt the full weight of how much he had taken her for granted. He walked quickly toward her, his heart racing, but this time, every step was filled with love and gratitude. "Mom," he said softly. When he reached her, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" She gave a small, shy smile. "I didn't want to bother you at work," she said gently. "I just wanted to see how you're doing." Her voice was quiet but full of care, and Jake felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He took her hand gently. "You're not bothering me. Come sit wherever you like. This place is your place too." He guided her to the best table in the house, the same table by the window where Keanu Reeves' mother had sat just days before. He pulled out the chair for her carefully, just as he had seen the suited men do for that woman. As she sat down, she looked around nervously. "This restaurant seems too fancy for me," she said with a light laugh. But Jake shook his head firmly. "No," he replied warmly. "You belong here. More than anyone." He served her himself, making sure every detail was perfect. Her cup of tea exactly the way she liked it, her meal served with care. He sat with her when he had a moment, talking quietly, listening as she told him about her week, her neighbors, her small joys, and worries. For the first time in a long while, he truly listened. He realized then that all the lessons he had learned from that kind stranger, Keanu Reeves' mother, had led him back to this moment. The respect he now showed to strangers had to begin at home. Kindness wasn't only about how he treated customers. It was also about how he treated the people who had loved him from the beginning. His mother's face softened as she relaxed into their conversation. For the first time in many months, she felt seen, valued, cherished. When she was done with her tea and ready to leave, Jake stood with her at the door. "Thank you for coming, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Please come again. Anytime. This door is always open for you." She hugged him tightly, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. As she walked away, Jake felt something deep inside heal. Maria had watched the whole exchange quietly from the counter. When Jake returned to his station. She caught his eye and gave him a small but knowing nod. "You're learning well," she said simply. Jake smiled. "I'm trying," he replied softly, "and I think I understand now." He looked around at the restaurant, at the tables he used to rush past, at the faces he used to judge too quickly. Everything looked different now, more human, more beautiful. He thought back to the note that still sat carefully tucked inside his wallet. "Thank you for learning today. I hope you carry this lesson forward, not just for me, but for everyone." He had carried it forward, not just for customers, but for his mother, for Maria, for himself. And as the restaurant continued to hum with life, Jake felt at peace. There would be difficult days ahead, mistakes he would still make, and lessons he would still have to learn. But he knew now that respect, kindness, and humility would guide him. The days continued to pass, and soon it had been a week since that life-changing afternoon when the quiet woman sat by the window and left more than just a note. She had left a lesson that had transformed Jake's view of the world and of himself. Each day since then, Jake had moved through the restaurant differently. Where once he rushed from table to table, eyes fixed on tips and orders, now he took time to see people, truly see them. He noticed their tired faces, their hesitant smiles, their small gestures of gratitude or exhaustion. And he responded with kindness, not because he was being watched, but because it had become a natural part of him now. Customers had begun to notice too. Some returned more often, seeking not just food but a warm place where they felt respected. Others left kind notes and generous tips, but it was their smiles and words of thanks that Jake valued most. Even his colleagues had started to change, softening their attitudes as they followed his example. Maria, ever wise and observant, smiled more often now as she worked alongside Jake, her quiet pride in him shining in her eyes. But Jake's journey was about to come full circle in a way he could never have expected. Late one afternoon, just before the dinner rush, the door opened again, and for a brief moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. In walked a tall man, wearing simple clothes but carrying himself with quiet confidence. His face was unmistakable. Though he wore sunglasses and kept his head low, there was no doubt it was Keanu Reeves himself. For a heartbeat, the entire restaurant froze. Jake's chest tightened. He had seen Keanu Reeves on screens for years, had admired his talent, but now here he was, standing at the entrance of this small restaurant, looking around quietly as if searching for something. Then their eyes met. Keanu removed his sunglasses, slowly, offering a small, gentle smile as he walked directly toward Jake. "You must be Jake," he said in a soft, kind voice. Jake's heart pounded so loudly he was sure others could hear it. Yes, sir," he managed to reply. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "My mother told me about her visit here." Those words carried more weight than Jake could bear. Shame and gratitude collided in his chest. But before he could speak, Keanu raised a hand gently, as if to calm him. "She told me everything," he continued. "How you spoke to her, and how you apologized. She said you treated her with kindness when it mattered most." Jake felt a lump rise in his throat. "Sir, I didn't know who she was. And I treated her badly at first. But she taught me something that day. She changed me." Keanu's smile widened slightly, full of warmth and understanding. "She said you did more than apologize. She said you learned. That matters." The other customers sat silently, watching this quiet, beautiful moment unfold. It felt unreal. A world-famous actor standing humbly before a waiter, not as a celebrity but as a son. Keanu stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only Jake could hear. "You know, my mother has always taught me that kindness is the true measure of a person. It's not what people do when the cameras are watching. It's what they do when no one's looking." Those words struck deep into Jake's heart. He nodded slowly, grateful beyond words. Keanu placed a hand gently on Jake's shoulder. Thank you for showing her respect. And thank you for learning. I just wanted to meet you myself. It was a moment Jake would treasure forever, not because of fame or attention, but because of the sincerity and humanity in Keanu's words and gesture. Then, in a quiet and simple way that felt perfectly fitting, Keanu sat down at one of the tables. Like any other guest, "May I have a cup of tea?" he asked politely. Jake smiled, truly smiled, and said, "Of course, sir, it would be an honor." He served Keanu personally, carefully preparing the tea just right, every motion filled with care. When he set the cup down, he couldn't help but whisper, "Thank you for coming." Keanu nodded, raising his cup slightly. "Thank you for what you've done here." The restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but it felt different now, softer, kinder, and filled with a quiet magic that no one could explain, but everyone could feel. When Keanu eventually left, he did so without fanfare or noise, just as humbly as he had entered. But his visit left a lasting imprint, not just on Jake but on every person who had been there to witness it. As the evening light faded, Maria approached Jake at the counter. "You've come far," she said gently. Jake nodded, feeling peace inside him like never before. "Thanks to her," he whispered. And he knew that from that day forward, every guest who walked through those doors would be treated with the respect and kindness they deserved, not because of who they were, but simply because they were human. Jake had learned that true kindness does not come from knowing who someone is or from expecting something in return. True kindness is a quiet gift we give because it makes the world softer, warmer, and better for all of us. And as he wiped down the same table where the woman had once sat, he smiled softly, feeling grateful that she had walked into his life when she did.